So, three primary goals I have for this morning. Talk about some trends in mental health with adolescents, how mental health trends connect to technology, and most important, how we can walk alongside our kids when they're struggling. That's the most important thing I want to talk about, and hopefully where we'll spend the most time. There's a lot to look at, so we're going to fly pretty fast at the beginning, so don't feel like you have to all of the numbers and things that I throw out. Don't feel like you have to know all of these things, but it's just important to know to see the trends that are happening in adolescence right now. So, brand new study was released in mid-February from the CDC. 17,000 high school students took this youth risk behavior survey in the fall of 2021. So the data is about 18 months old, but the results were just released this month, or last month, February. 42% of students felt persistently sad or hopeless. Nearly 3 in 5 teen girls felt persistent sadness. 2021 boys are about half that at 29%. Persistent sadness is feeling so sad or hopeless every day for at least 2 weeks that they stopped doing usual activities. So 42% of students, 4 out of 10, 2 out of 5, this was a regular thing. 22% of students were seriously considered suicide. 1 in 5. 1 in 3 girls, which is an alarming statistic. 1 in 3 girls seriously considered suicide. 24% of girls made a plan. That's almost a quarter. 12% of boys. 1 in 10 attempted suicide. All these numbers are elevated in LGBTQ students, dramatically higher. None of this includes successful suicides. It's a bad word to say, like successful. Completed is another word to say, but and those were pretty high for about 6,000 in 2020, 6,400 in 2021, ages 15 to 24. So those numbers, and it's funny because with girls, at least in this study, girls were affected a lot more. Boys are about 4 or 5 times more likely to commit suicide than girls. There are about that many more completed suicides among males than females. So this is rightly being called a crisis by culture. Check out the first graph that we have here on the screen. And the dark line, the top line is females. The gray line is males. And you can see this is percentage with high depressive symptoms since 1991. And I want you to notice when the jump happens. The jump happens around 2011, 2012. Boys drops quite a bit, but then goes up. And girls just absolutely skyrocket about that time. Next graph. This is major depressive episode in the last 12 months by age group. The bottom line is 50 years old and older. Basically, pretty even. The dotted dark line is 26 to 49. Again, stayed about the same. And then we have 12 to 17 and 18 to 25 that both, not at different rates, but they both go up. And again, notice when they go up. 2011, 2012, they both jump. Next graph. This is percentage of U.S. teens with major depression in the last year by gender. Boys are blue, girls are red, green's in the middle. And again, we see when it really elevates, same time. And girls more than boys. Next graph. This is percent of students who felt sad or hopeless or had suicidal thoughts in the last year. Blue is sad or hopeless, red is suicidal thoughts. Again, the when is the same. Boys stay fairly even, but it's still going up. Girls jumping quite a bit. Next graph. This one is emergency room admissions for self-harm is the blue, and then the red is completed suicides. Also, notice that the scale is different. So the suicides is a rate out of 100,000, and the blue is only out of 1,000. And so it's not like they're on the same scale on the graph. It's a little misleading because of that. But what I want you to see is the trend and how they're both going up. And again, we're seeing it around the same time as the others. Okay, next one. This is percentage of students who seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. 10-year trend, boys barely increased, girls from 19% to 30%, and that's that 1 in 3 number that we talked about earlier of girls who seriously considered suicide. And then number 7, next graph, this is just kind of numbers that show us trends since 2011. Okay, all those things that we talked about, sadness, serious consideration, made a suicide plan, attempted suicide, and all these totals are both genders combined. But basically all the trends are going in the wrong way. And this is where our kids are right now in our culture. Let's go back to that first graph, and I'm going to leave this up here for a little bit. As I said over and over again, most of the time, that jump happened around 2011, 2012. So what researchers have done is they've looked for causes. What happened around that time that was pervasive across society, that affected everybody basically, impacted everyday life, and were associated with depression. And a lot of researchers are pairing anxiety and depression with smartphones. Because 2012 was the time when more than half of U.S. adults owned a smartphone. And initiated in 2007 when the first one came out, social media was widely used by the early 2010s. And what they're finding is that heavy users of technology are twice as likely as light users to be depressed or have low well-being. 2016, the average U.S. adolescent spent about 6 hours a day on screens. Andrew, what was it, 9.5 on the newest one? 9.5 hours a day on screens. The trends for the last 10 years, rates of adolescent depression has increased. Since 2012, happiness and life satisfaction has declined. Since 2009, emergency department admissions for self-harm behaviors tripled among 10 to 14-year-old girls. 10 to 14-year-old girls. Emergency department admissions for suicide attempts or ideation doubled or increased substantially, as did the rate of completed suicides among adolescents. Adolescents who spent more time using digital media reported lower psychological well-being, including lower life satisfaction, less happiness, more feelings of loneliness, social isolation, more depression. Adolescents who spent 5 or more hours a day versus 1 hour a day on electronic devices were 66% more likely to have at least one risk factor for suicide. Heavy internet users were twice as likely to be unhappy as light users. Similarly, they found a doubling in depression from no use to heavy use of social media. So that this is all depressing for us, to look at this and go, wow, this is a big deal. Let's look at another graph here, and this is going to help us a little bit also. This is time spent on screens during a day is the bottom axis. Top axis is percentage of anxiety and depression, and those are broken down in age groups 11 to 13 and 14 to 17. And what we see the trends are, for the first hour or two, you see the trends are, it actually kind of helps a little bit, or it's neutral, that time that they spend. But once you hit that 2-hour mark, for pretty much every group, it just starts to increase the amount of feelings of anxiety and depression that take place. So it's not that all of it is bad, but the amount of time that is spent affects it substantially. If we look at the next one, next graph, this is 3 different studies that were put together into one graph. The dotted lines are both social media for boys and girls. The light gray one is just online in general and how that pairs with being unhappy. And then the dark black line is smartphone and low well-being. Again, what we're looking at here is trends what we're seeing. But if you look at social media in specific, which is why I wanted to look at this graph, social media for girls is pretty much bad all the time from what we're seeing. And boys, it's kind of neutral for a while, and then it starts to go up after we hit that 2-hour mark. And so, again, time spent per day affects how kids are feeling about themselves. I don't know if you know about this, but Meta, who's the company that owns Facebook and Instagram and other social media stuff, they know that their product is not good for teenagers, and it hasn't changed how they market their product. There was an internal research survey that was done by them that they did not release, but was leaked by employees. And there's a Wall Street Journal article that details this. Basically, the effect they're having on teenagers that they know. They have not released this even to Congress. They have been unwilling to do that, even though they were asked to, and they did not. But they know that this is affecting girls. These are some of the statements that they made within Facebook for their own study. 32% of teen girls said they felt bad about their bodies. Instagram made them feel worse. One of their conclusions, we make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 girls. Teens blame Instagram for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. The tendency to share only the best moments, a pressure to look perfect, and an addictive product can send teens spiraling toward eating disorders, an unhealthy sense of their own bodies, and depression. A study of teens in the US and UK, more than 40% of Instagram users who reported feeling unattractive said the feeling began on the app. About a quarter of the teens who reported feeling not good enough said the feeling started on Instagram. Many also said the app undermined their confidence and the strength of their friendships. Teens told us that they don't like the amount of time they spend on the app, but feel like they have to be present. They often feel addicted and know that what they're seeing is bad for their mental health, but they feel unable to stop themselves. I think it's safe to say that the peddlers of social media do not have our kids' best interests in mind or at heart. The Josh Nelson conclusion is that the bottom line is more important than the next generation to them. That's my conclusion, that's my opinion, that's not fact. But it might be fact. So the one researcher I read, he says another problem that screens has led to with adolescents is what he calls digital absorption. We become absorbed because screen interaction is easier than face-to-face social interaction. Our mobile devices offer an escape from interpersonal venues, especially if you're an introvert. Now, if a person feels awkward in a social situation, they just bury their head in their phone. There's an unwritten rule of 3 among kids that if you're in a group of 3 and you're kind of not part of the conversation, that it's okay. I can pull up my phone and just look at it and kind of space myself. I don't know that they would be able to actually articulate those words and that thought that that's what it is, but it's just kind of what they do. Of course, they'll do it when you're just in a one-on-one conversation as well. But what this is it creates a downward spiral, because when you flee interpersonal communication with other people, and it only makes you more antisocial. When you escape from what is awkward and difficult to what is easy, you just do the easy more. And then you do the easy more. And then this becomes harder. And it just becomes harder. And so it's just a downward spiral. It's a cycle that just goes around on itself and makes it worse. People who struggled with insecurity, people always have. But the more they use digital communication, the less equipped they are for face-to-face communication. There's another wrinkle to this. There's a professor from MIT who calls this the empathy gap. The more we become absorbed in our digital world, the less we see other people. The less we see other people's struggles and problems, because we're focused on ourselves and our phones. It actually hinders our ability to recognize facial cues with others. We don't notice that somebody's feeling tense or struggling. And there's something interesting about this. Some other research I've been doing completely separate from parenting is that I've been doing some stuff into brain science and how it affects our faith growth and our spiritual community. Is from a book called The Other Half of Church. And they say this: God designed facial recognition circuitry into our brains and linked it to our joy center. Brain science reveals that this joy sensation is crucial for emotional and relational development. Our brain looks specifically to the face of another person to find joy, and this fills up our emotional gas tank. So when I see Jason, and I'm like, Jason, hey! What my face just did sent a message to his brain that said, he's glad to see me. And that sets off a joy response inside your brain that is beyond, it just happens instantly. That's not something you control. And when we lose that, we lose joy in our lives. And when we don't have that face-to-face connection, that face-to-face interaction, it's a joy leak. And the prevalence of screens in our lives is actually something that sucks our joy, because joy and screen time are inversely proportional. They go opposite ways. As joy goes up, or as screen time goes up, joy goes down. And so when our eyes and our face are staring at our phones, we're not engaging with the faces of the people around us. And screens do not take the place. You can just do FaceTime then on a screen. Our brains can actually tell the difference between a live face and the screen or the face on a screen. Our brains do not react and respond the same way, and so it's not the same. And so our brains know the difference, which is crazy. So that face-to-face interaction, which I used to say that we, in youth group, we did small groups. A secondary purpose of that, we're teaching kids how to have face-to-face relationships because they're so bad at them, because they're so sucked into their phone. And the more I've done research, the more I've said, actually, that's kind of a really primary important thing that we need to have as part of our ministry, because kids don't know how to do it. And they need it. They need it desperately in order to be healthy. Another reason that social media makes it rough for teenagers is because during this phase of life, they're trying to figure out their identity and who they are. That question of who am I is constantly playing in the back of their brains as they're going through adolescence. It's a continual loop. And coming up with an answer to this question is obviously complicated. Some of us are still working on it at our age, trying to figure out who am I? And this is often figured out largely through relationships. And where do a large portion of relationships exist for teenagers? On their phones. That's where a lot of it happens, and social media specifically. So this, again, makes it rougher for them to develop identity through relationships on a cell phone. Kara Powell, who's the director of Fuller Youth Institute at Fuller Seminary, she wrote this book called Right Click. This is a good resource for you. I think we have one of these in the library, the resource library over by the Kids Zone. This is a great book. Anytime you write a book that's about technology, it's basically some things in it are out of date as soon as you publish it. But there's a lot of philosophical ideas in here that still remain true. One of those is this idea that she writes that social media is the new school lunchroom. Andrew, a few weeks ago, talked about how viewing technology as a location with your kids. And this is a similar way of thinking. When you and I were in school, think back, I know, a long time ago, right? When we were in school, for me, I think it was as much in the hallways as like between classes, before and after school, as it was the lunchroom. But the idea of, okay, where do I fit in? Who do I sit with? What kind of clothes do we wear? What do my peers do after school and on the weekend? How do we express ourselves? How do we remember things and good and bad experiences together? This idea of a social laboratory. For us, it was in the cafeteria, in the hallways, just when we interacted with our friends or people at school. And so this changes in today's current world where social media is now that forum. And the thing about it is that there's no limit to social media in our kids' lives other than the limit that they or us put on them. And so what you and I experienced for brief moments of time that were limited and had clear, defined boundaries is now 24/7. This idea of who am I, this idea of having to be at a certain level of how I appear to people. Am I acceptable? Am I good enough? Is on display, on social media all the time. And that doesn't mean even that how they're taking pictures of themselves and posting them. Sometimes it's just what I see and how do I compare to what I see on here. And that also plays into this effect, and that happens all the time, not just when they're posting. So this culture of FOMO also, the kids don't want to miss out. That if I'm not present in this way, I'm going to miss out on something. Their own desires and expectations, the way our culture is teaching them, they don't have an opportunity to be off. And when you feel like you always have to measure up to someone else's best, you have to be on all the time, that's a ton of pressure for kids today. And I think this is a part of how social media ramps up anxiety and depression. So, all that's trends and kind of how social media and technology play into those trends. So, like I said, where I want to spend most of our time today, what do we do about it? How can we walk through this stuff with kids as they're dealing with this? In everything I've read and worked on leading up to this, there's one key word and concept that keeps coming up over and over again. That sounds like the answer for us as leaders and parents to do about this. And it's not to become Amish. It's not to get rid of all of your technology. It's not to fully abstain from social media. The answer is connection. Connection. You connect in person with your child. That is the biggest force and superpower that you have to overcome anxiety, depression paired with technology in your kid's life. And then you give them avenues for face-to-face connections with their friends, with positive other adults, youth leaders, extended family, any way that you can build connection with trusted people in a face-to-face setting. Beyond, you're number one as parent. And then how do you bring other people around? There's other research that talks about if you can get 5 trusted adults in your kid's life, the opportunities for them to be healthy and advance in beyond when they move out of your house, it just skyrockets how well they can do when you have up to 5 or more trusted adults in your kid's life that are pouring into them. All right, so I did a survey of some of our high school students because they still like me even though I left them. But I asked 3 questions of them, and I'm going to give you some of their responses on the screen so you can read along with me. But the first question I asked is, what should parents not do or say when walking alongside their children through mental or emotional unhealth? The first answer was, don't ask, why aren't you fixed yet? This seems kind of, you shouldn't ask that question. But it's difficult as a parent when you're walking through this and you're like, we've done counseling, we've done this whole list of things, and you're still, doesn't seem like you're getting better. But the amount of shame this puts onto a kid is, you can't measure it. Don't pressure them. Don't try to influence their feelings by arguing. Don't force them to do things they don't want to do. Of course, isn't that what all parenting is? is sacrificing everything yourself and then making them do things they don't want to do. So again, part of this is their perspective, but I think there's some good things in here too. Don't talk about how much harder it is for you, the parents, than it is for them. Don't try to downplay your child's emotions. Again, we're talking about shame here. Don't share their experiences, lecture, tell you that it's your fault, tell you that you can control it. So when share their experiences, that's you as parents. They said it doesn't help if you share your experiences necessarily. Don't lecture them, definitely. That's what you want to avoid at all costs. Do not lecture. Don't say, just pray about it, give it to Jesus and it will all be fine, or just stop worrying, or just stop being so anxious about it. And don't be mean. Next slide. So yeah, just pray about it, give it to Jesus. Cliches don't work. And then don't be mean. That should be an obvious one, but sometimes our perspective of what is mean and what is not is different than theirs. All right, next question I asked is, what are some things that others have said or done that have been helpful to you through your journey of mental and emotional unhealth? So this has been helpful. Ask me about my thoughts. Help me put my thoughts into words. Just listen without offering solutions. Just be there for them. Listen to me and what I have to say. Don't give advice. Just let the kid know I'm here for you if you ever need anything. To talk, to listen. I hope you see some similar patterns there. This reminds me of when I've done any kind of marriage stuff. Don't try to fix it. Like I'm a fixer. My wife shares something with me. Hey, this is a problem. This is something. Okay, well, let's figure out. Here's all the things. And she wants to slap me. And I'm like, don't you want to fix the problem? No, I just want you to be with me in it. We have a question in our house, do you want me to feel it or fix it? 99% of the time, I just want you to be present with me in it. I just want you to feel it with me. And I think kids are saying the same thing. I just want you to be present in my hurt. I just want you to listen. Don't try to fix it. So I think it's a similar thing here. The third question I ask is, what advice would you give to parents if their child teen is struggling with mental and emotional health? Again, patterns are going to continue. Listen to your child. Don't try to force anything. Give them enough space. So if we hover, it's hard not to hover when your parents are or when your kids are struggling. But sometimes if we hover too close, we're not giving them what they need. Work with them. Help them feel safe. That's another big one. Offer help and take care of them. And that's just kind of like, hey, I just need to know that my primary needs are taken care of. I just need to know that you're a safe person and this is a safe place. Third one, just listen to your kids, please. Again, we have that idea of just being present and listening. Again, listen to their concerns and thoughts. Try not to fix everything. Offer numerous solutions. Andrew, you can go on to the next one. Take a step back. Just be there when they need something. Again, we're giving them some space in this. And I promise I did not put this in, but one of them said, ask Josh for advice. Now, that's not necessarily the best advice I can give you, but I have walked through this with my own kid as well. So there's a book called The Whole Brain Child that has been super helpful for Amy and I as we walk through this. This was recommended to us by our son's counselor as he was walking through stuff. And it just helped us make so much sense of what's going on in his brain and in his mind and in his heart as he's walking through stuff that's difficult. So, two sides of the brain. Left side of the brain can very simplistically be described as logical. Right side of the brain can be described as emotional. And in the healthy brain, processing goes back and forth between the two sides. Just naturally, it just bounces back and forth when you're healthy. And so you can be emotional about things, you can be illogical about things, and it plays off of each side the way it's supposed to. But when our brains are hyper-engaged and when our emotions are hyper-engaged on the right side of the brain, or we feel threatened in some way, then we can't apply logic or reason. Because that's the left side of the brain to a situation. Our brains literally won't work completely in those situations. The amygdala, which is a part of the brain that controls fight, flight, or freeze, is activated, and it's like a loud alarm that's telling us we're not safe. And our body's only focus is survival. So when we can't use our whole brain to deal with our emotions properly, then we can't logically process our emotions. And when that happens, for kids, despair creeps in at this point. For adolescents, their brains are still developing. I don't know if you know this, but the brain is not fully developed until about age 25, especially with guys. Girls, it happens maybe a little sooner. That's why girls seem a little more mature than guys, always, for their whole lives. But they just are. They're just better. But the frontal cortex, which is responsible for higher-end thinking, judgment, cause and effect consequences, long-term planning, decision-making, that part of the brain is not fully developed. So if you have a boy and he does something dumb, you ask him, what were you thinking? He wasn't. Literally, he just urge, respond, I do, because my brain isn't developed. That part of my brain is still forming, and I'm trying to figure that out through time. And then when you add despair and trauma and stress to this already undeveloped brain, the functions of the two sides of the brain become detached, not physically, but the neurons and the pathways in your brain become detached, and they don't travel across like they're supposed to. So we experienced this a ton with our son, Jonathan, where his emotions would take over, and we as really wise, smart parents would just try to reason things out with him. And it doesn't work. It never works. Because his logical side of his brain is not plugged in at this point. It's all emotion. It's all what I'm feeling. It's all, and you can't rationalize yourself out of it. You have to get to the point where that side of the brain has calmed down. And a lot of times they logic themselves out of it at that point on their own without your help, just by you asking questions and talking through it with them and being present. So what do we do in this situation when we have this moment where the right side of our brain, our emotions are the despair, all those things that are just on high alert, we're in fight or flight mode. What do we do as parents? Again, you're going to find this answer amazing because I already said it. You connect with your kid. And you connect with your kid on an emotional level. If they're in the middle of emotions, you have to get in the emotion with them. That doesn't mean if they're mad and yelling, you respond by getting mad and yelling. That's not what I'm saying, because that certainly won't help anything. I know from experience. But what you have to do is you have to empathize, is what you have to do. You have to have empathy, because if you try to attack it with logic, it's just not going to work. Do things like just sit with them. If they're struggling and hurting, just sit with them. You don't have to say anything. Just be there. Sometimes they need space. And so one way you can do that is by sitting close by. So maybe they're in their room and they just need some time alone. So maybe you just sit somewhere close by to their room. And them knowing that you're present matters to them. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be productive in that moment, because your being productive is connecting with your kid in that moment. I know there's a list of things that still has to be done at home, but in that moment, you've got to connect with them. Some kids like to be held when they're struggling emotionally. Some kids, Jonathan, don't touch him. Like, he did not want that. But for some kids, it's the right thing. So you have to figure out with your kid if that's a good thing or not. Sometimes it's letting them rant. Jonathan would do this at 11 o'clock at night. We're trying to get him to go to bed, and his emotions are 100 miles an hour, and we just had to let him go off for 45 minutes. You don't have to agree with anything they say. You don't have to, in fact, don't disagree with what they say. Just let them vomit verbally, get it all out, be present, don't get upset. That's the hard thing for me. It's like, you aren't making any sense. You're an idiot. What are you doing? Don't talk. It's like, but you just have to keep that inside. As the adult, you have to remain the calm one in the situation. One of the other things we do is we'd let him throw eggs at a tree outside. when he's just mad. You know, because that doesn't hurt anything or anybody. Now, these days, eggs cost a little more money, might be a little more expensive, but give some form of physical outlet. That's okay. That's not going to hurt somebody or hurt anything. And just listening. It's okay to have boundaries within those emotions. You know, they can't be disrespectful to you or another person. They can't hurt anybody. They can't damage anything. You know, it's okay to build those boundaries within it. But let them know that you're there for them and that you're there with them. I think that's a big, big thing. That, hey, I'm with you in this. Then when the storm has calmed down, then you redirect. You begin to help them find logical solutions to the problem. And like I said earlier, often they'll find those solutions on their own because now the logical part of their brain has started to kick in and they'll be like, oh yeah, so this, then I can do this, X, Y, Z. Got it. You don't even have to do anything sometimes. I don't know if this is the way at your house, husbands. Do you ever try to tell your wife, hey, just calm down? Does that work? Does that work for you guys? No. Why? Because the emotional side of their brain is going so high. And I know this is gender stereotyping, so I apologize, ladies, because us guys get in the same thing too, because we can get mad about something and be like, hey, it's just sports. Who cares? You know, or whatever the thing is that you're mad about. But when you just tell somebody, hey, just calm down. Oh, thank you. That's all I needed. Thank you for just telling me to calm down. Now I can go on with my life. It doesn't work. It's the same idea with our kids when they're struggling. We can't just tell them to calm down. Just don't be anxious. You know, just give it to Jesus. No, those things don't work. Because it's basically diminishing their feelings. It's telling them that what you're feeling right now has no value. It's not valid. It may not be accurate, but it's still a legitimate feeling. And so we have to let them do that. One of the things that really helped Amy and I is this idea we came to where we just decided we were going to believe Jonathan. We didn't know his 7th grade year, he missed 56 days of school out of whatever they do, 180 or something like that. We got so many truancy letters from the school. But we also were in very good communication with him the whole time. The principal would send the letter and she's like, I'm sorry I have to send this by law, but I know you guys are working on stuff. She was super nice. But every morning we'd get up for go to school. We didn't know if he was going to go to school. Every morning it was a battle. And it is exhausting. It is exhausting. But we got to the point where we just decided we're going to believe him. If he says, I'm hurting, I'm struggling. Okay. You need some time today? Fine. That's fine. Well, you know, you're in 7th grade. You know, what do your grades matter in 7th grade down the road? Not really much at all. And so we just decided to believe him. And we did this with Micah too. He had a classroom teacher I can't remember, freshman or sophomore year, did not like. He's like, she doesn't teach us. If she says something once, she won't repeat it. We ask for help, and she's like, I already explained this. I'm not telling you again. And we're like, no, teachers don't do that. You know, we're trying to logic it away. And then we started talking to other parents, and they're like, oh, our kids too. So it turned out she was just a poor teacher. And so we believed our kid, and we said, hey, school, we don't want our kid in this teacher's classroom again. We made him finish the semester and work hard and do his best. But we believed him. We're like, okay, we won't ever have you take her classes ever again. Liam, same thing. He had some physical health things that happened after he had COVID. Turned out he would just complain about headaches and body aches. And it turned out we learned just a couple months ago through some testing that he has Lyme disease. And it was probably in his body before he had COVID. His immune system tanked when he had COVID, and now Lyme disease, I'm going to step up and take over everything. And so, but, you know, we could have just been like, Liam, just suck it up. You can go to school today. But there were actual, like his ocular nerve was inflamed. There were all sorts of actual physical evidence that he was not okay. But we could have been like, Liam, you're just a kid, I know you're hurting. My favorite quote to give my kids: if you only did things on the day you feel 100%, you never get anything done. Challenge you can do it. But that doesn't help, unfortunately. Sad day for dad. But believe your kid. Does this open you to being manipulated by your kids? Yes. Is that the worst thing in the world? No. Because if you are being manipulated, you're probably going to figure it out sooner or later. If they're trying to milk it, you're going to figure it out over time. And then you have more conversations. But I think if you trust your kid first, what you're actually doing is you're building relational connection with them during that time. That relational influence you have in their life. Instead of the positional influence of I'm your parent, I'm your authority, now I'm building relational influence, which needs to grow over time because your positional influence is going to drop as they get older and as they leave your house for sure. You lose that positional influence, but you have to gain that relational influence. And this is one way to do that. And I think a lot of times kids seem manipulative, but I think it's that fight, flight, or freeze thing where they're just trying to survive the situation. And manipulation is the tool they know. It's the tool they know. And so they use it. Usually what they verbalize is probably a symptom of something deeper as well. And so helping them to dig to find out what that is through those layers. And I would ask the question, what happens if you don't believe your kid? If they tell you they're hurting and they're struggling and you're just like, you're okay. What happens? What you're doing is you're building a rift between yourself and your child. You're putting a wedge there in that relationship. Whether what they're saying is accurate or not doesn't matter. You need to invest in them and pour into them and connect with them, and then you figure out later, is this accurate? How can we take steps to help? But that connection, I think, comes first. Best book that I've read on this is this book called Seen, and we're going to give, guess what? Since you guys are the only two couples here, you both get a copy of this book this morning. You win. I have lots of highlights. Almost, half of the book is highlighted. I loved this book. It was so good. And all it is talking about what, the idea of healing despair and anxiety through the power of connection, which is what we talked about this morning. When you're walking through this as a parent, it's so easy to feel powerless. So easy to feel powerless, to feel fearful, to not know what to do. But your greatest weapon against despair in your kid's life is you, as I've already said. You are the greatest weapon against that in your kids' lives. Our brains are designed to respond in predictable ways when we connect with others on a deep level and when we feel seen. Scientists can predict how the brains are going to respond with connection and when kids feel seen, when they feel heard, when they know that people they really care enough about them to dig into their life. A secure attachment with an adult can not only help heal and rewire the brain from a past insecure attachment, but it can also help decrease the risk for despair and suicidal thoughts in adolescence. What you say and how you show up in your kid's life matters. The way you respond to someone who's experiencing emotional despair could actually lead them to feel more alive, or it could lead them the other way. So connection. Our brains are wired to respond to love and empathy, even when we're in despair. When we connect with another person or when someone empathizes with us and helps us feel seen, the two sides of the brain, that's when it begins to heal. So when we dig into connection with our kids, those two sides of the brain, that dispairing that happens begins to heal with connection. Love and empathy are those tools. This repairing can restore a wholeness that allows emotional processing then to flip over to the logical processing, which I've already talked about. This happens in the context of healthy relationships and love. So to close out here, I want to give you five tools that you can use, 5 pairing tools to help pair the brain back together. And these are all in this book and given in much more detail than what I'm going to talk about this morning. But these will help create healthy, secure attachment and a relational connection. And I would say to use these alongside the spiritual tools of prayer and God's Word and the power of faith. That these aren't to be done, away from Jesus, but Jesus interflows all of these things. So, first tool is this, to show up. Presence influences healing more than anything. It kickstarts the brain's pairing process. Here's some ways to do that. I already talked about this, outside the door presence, when they need to just have their space, but you're close, and they know you're close. Next way to show up when it matters to them. With no agenda, except to enjoy time with them, to cheer them on, to give them a place to be themselves. So that could be if they're involved in a sport, if they're in a choir, if they're, doing any activity, you show up to be there with them. Or you just say, hey, you want to play a game? Let's sit down and play a game together. And you put the phone away and you don't worry about other things and you just enjoy them. Or you ask them, hey, what do you want to do? Let's go do something you want to do. And you just enjoy time together. Show up when it's inconvenient for you. Be available. Jonathan loves to go on drives. And he loves to go on the drives at 11 o'clock at night. Amy and I are getting ready. We're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. But just sitting in a car and just driving helps him think. It helps him get out of that fight or flight. And sometimes he doesn't say a word, but he's thinking and he's processing, and he gets to the point where he's resolved something in himself by the time we're done. And there are times when I'm like, dude, I can't go any farther. I'm going to fall asleep. It's not safe for me to drive. And he's like, okay, and we just go home. But those are certainly times when I don't want to go out and go driving. But it helps him. Sometimes we talk through things, and it's helpful. There are a lot of kids that struggle with, I'm going to sit down across from you, and we're going to have this eye-to-eye, face-to-face conversation, and they don't know how to handle that. But if you're sitting side by side, sometimes that's a better way to have that conversation than face-to-face. So when it's inconvenient for you, show up often. Find ways to be predictably available, where they know that you are available for them. And I would say show up unpredictably as well. Find ways to randomly show up in the life of your kid. Buy your girls flowers for no reason, just because they're your daughters. Take your kid to a ball game. Whatever they love, just do something fun or meaningful that's just random for no reason whatsoever other than the fact that you love them. And show up undistracted. Devices can keep us as parents from being fully present. So figure out ways to show up undistracted so that they are the focus. So that's your first tool, is showing up. Second tool is to see them. To slow down enough to see them, to see their feelings, to see their hurts, to see what they're experiencing, to have empathy. Not all feelings should be acted upon. Not all feelings are accurate, but all feelings should be acknowledged. Growth happens when we learn how to recognize feelings and discern how to act on them appropriately. That's maturity. I feel this, but I know the Bible says this. And that's different than this, so what am I going to trust? Am I going to trust my feelings, or am I going to trust God's Word? But when they're in that emotional state, they can't get to that logical processing yet. But over time, they can. But I still have to acknowledge this, what I'm feeling. I can't just be like, push it down. Oh, wait, that's what Josh does. Just push it down, stuff it. I don't need to talk about this. We'll deal with it later when I explode of all these things that I've been pressing down inside. Acknowledge feelings. That's okay. See them. When your kids are hurting, they don't care if their feelings are rational. All they know is that they hurt, they're sad, they're disappointed, they're rejected, they're angry. And the only question they have at that moment is, do you see me? Do you care enough to be with me in this? To help kids in despair, you have to meet emotion with emotion and logic with logic, as we've already talked about. The thing is when we try to meet emotion with logic, we don't just miss the moment, we miss them. We're missing who they are in that moment. And I think we just need to connect with them and say, hey, this is who you are right here. And this is something that I struggled with big time. Like I was wanted to come in and be like, all right, let's fix this. Here's what you need to think. Here's what you need to feel. This is all okay. And I had a lot of change that I had to make in my own heart and my own life in order to adjust to what was needed in the situation, what was actually going to bring about results. My wife and I played off each other poorly in our journey through this because it was, I'm a natural challenger. I know that you can do more than you think you can, and so I'm going to push you. And then when our kid's hurting, I want to, hey, I can push you toward this. And Amy's like, no, I want to coddle you. I want to nurture you. I want to take care of you. And we were on two different pages as parents, and it was not good. Because it made the tension in our relationship really, there was some really hard times that we had to walk through. And thankfully, Jonathan's counselor was like, hey, do you guys need to do some counseling together? And we're like, yeah, we probably should do that. And it's been so good for us to talk through. But getting on the same page together, we both had to move to move together. But it's been our parenting journey has changed dramatically for the better once we got on the same page. And when your kids feel seen, you win their heart. You win their heart. I think they know you're on your side. You know that you're on their side. But when they know you're on their side, that's a difference. Third one, and we've heard this over and over again, just listen. This is a key pairing tool to reduce feelings of despair and to promote healings. Be willing to accept those big emotions, theirs and yours. The challenge is not to be triggered into a stress response or a freak-out moment. No parent has ever had a freak-out moment while the person in despair is talking. So be ready, be prepared. Hey, big emotions are going to come out. How am I going to handle myself in this moment? Don't be defensive, even if their emotional rant attacks you. And now's not the time to defend yourself or to tell them why they're wrong. Okay? I think this may be the greatest risk or obstacle in helping our kids process their emotions is we shut down their emotions because they're wrong. Or because they're saying something that hurts you. And now it becomes about me, not about them. If they say something hurtful, you can deal with that later. And you should. You shouldn't just let it go. You should talk that out with them, but not right then. Wait for it. Be a safe person. Because when you listen well, you communicate safety. You said, I'm a safe person to be with when you're struggling. Words, tone, body language. Words are, 7% of communication, I think, is what research shows. How do you respond when they say something? I always told our youth leaders to practice their unsurprised face. So that when kids tell them something that's difficult or tough, they're not like, oh, wow, there's really something wrong with you. No, it's just, oh, man, that sucks. How can I walk through this with you? And so we've got to be safe in our tone and our body language as well. Eye contact is good if it's good for them. Don't force it. Appropriate physical touch is good if it's good for them. For some kids, it can have a profound effect on their despair, just that physical touch. Read how they're responding. If they seem uncomfortable, then change your approach. Adjust on the fly. When you listen, you talk less. And that's hard for some of us. Your presence is more important than your words. And like I said earlier, avoid lecturing at all costs, because this flips a shutdown switch for them when you just start lecturing. And avoid cliches. We talked about that as well. Don't ever say, Oh, this isn't a big deal. You'll get over this. Everything happens for a reason. Just pray about it. They need you. They don't need those words. Fourth tool, speak life. Affirm constantly. Negative words or thoughts have much more impact in our hearts and in our minds. You guys know this because you've experienced it for yourself. They're quicker to surface. They're harder to discredit. You can have the same thought that pops up 1 billion times in your head that is completely untrue, but it's so hard for your heart and your mind to disagree with it. And so you have to overwhelm negativity with positive affirmation. The impact is felt with this in repetition over time. Repetition over time. Continue over and over again. Speak life. Give them hope. They need to know that their life holds value, that they matter. That despite their imperfections and what the world says about them, that God has placed unique attributes within each of us that reflect His nature and that can serve other people in this church. Give them hope. And dads, you have a bigger role here to play than the mom does. Unfortunately, we have more pressure on us in this. How we speak life into our sons, and maybe especially more into our daughters, has a greater effect than mom's words. Sorry, moms. But it's true. Research and studies show that dad's words have more impact and effect than mom's words. And so dads, you've got to give positive verbal affirmation to your kids. Fifth one is this: build grit. I started with number 5 and how to help my kid. This is not where you start. This is where I started. And that's the mistake I made. Grit is just passion and sustained persistence applied toward long-term achievement. Stick-to-itiveness. Toughness, mental and emotional toughness. This is not where you start. 2 key components on battling despair is knowing that adversity will always be part of our lives. So if a kid knows it's always going to be tough, and that's okay. Instead of, I can't wait to the point where everything's fixed and I'm okay and nothing is bad. If that's their goal, then there's no hope because they'll never arrive. So helping them to know adversity will always be part of your life. Not as a downer, like, hey, guess what? You're always going to suck. Awesome. But then teaching them how to respond by embracing, not resisting the lessons that you discover along the way. Jonathan is big into avoidance, which most of us are. I want to avoid the things that are hard for me. And so how do we help him see and learn that, hey, when I push through this, I can learn I can do it. I can overcome because I can look down the road, which is another thing we can do, is that we remind them of, hey, here's how you've had victory in the past. And that builds grit into their lives as well. It's an emotional muscle that we have to strengthen and build over time, and especially when they're in the moment where they're struggling the most, it's not a strong muscle. And so you have to do those other things. And it's number 5 for a reason. You have to do the other things first before you get there. Growth mindset also. Help them know they're like, well, I'm just not a good student. Well, I'm just not good at this. I'm just not. The key word here is yet. You just haven't gotten there yet. Maybe you're not good at math and it's terrible in your life. But maybe you just haven't learned how to quite do it that makes sense to you yet. And so that idea of being in a growth mindset where I'm not stuck here where I am. I know I can get there. I'm not there yet. Maybe I'm not as good a Christian as I want to be, but I can be because I'm just not there yet. So if we add that word into when we talk to our kids, it helps them know, hey, growth is possible. So last thing I want to show you is this when we and they feel. So when we show up, they feel loved. When we see them, they feel understood. When we listen, they feel safe. When we speak life, they feel worthy. When we develop grip, they feel empowered. I'd be willing to bet that we could list the things on the right side of the screen and be like, do you want your kids to feel these things? And every single parent in the world would be like, yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't just happen. We have to do it intentionally, especially when they're struggling with their emotional and mental health. We have to do the things that are going to lead us there, and it's hard work. And a lot of it is counter to our nature and counter to what we want to do in our own hearts and minds and lives. But we have to do the hard work of showing up and seeing them and listening and speaking life and building grit over time. That's not a magic formula, but I think a lot of this is built into us through how God created us. And I think brain scientists are catching up to what God has known about us all along. That these things are all things that's like, all the things on the left are all scriptural too. You know, science is telling us this, but it's all from Scripture as well. We know we should be present in our kids' lives. You know, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. You know, we're supposed to encourage and lift one another up. You know, all these things are scriptural, and God knew that. He knew how our kids are wired, and how we can walk through this with them. So connection is your biggest tool. Your superpower as a parent, and how to walk through this with your kid. You won't have all the answers. You don't have to. Take that burden, that pressure off your shoulders. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have the fix. You don't have to know how it's going to be right in the end. Bring other trusted people along for the ride. If your kid needs counseling, do that. It's worth it. It's worth the financial investment. It's worth the time investment. And make sure you get the right fit for them, not for you. Right fit for them. And obviously a Christian counselor, in my opinion, would be a better fit than a non. Because they're going to lead them in the way that is going to best guide your kid in their spiritual life, not just their emotional well-being. So, any questions you guys have? Fire hose for about an hour. So anything that you guys have questions about or thoughts that were sparked? Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. This works with anybody. 100%. Well, thanks, guys, for coming. Hey, we have our winners. Yeah. Congratulations. You bet. Really good book. Lots of great stuff. And it really digs into some of the stuff I talked about today, even better than what I talked about. And one of the authors is a PhD in counselor, licensed therapist. And so this is not just like an opinion. A lot of this is research-based alongside of what they have experienced in life and leading people and counseling people along the way. And so hopefully this is a good tool for you moving forward. So let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you so much for your son, Jesus, who you modeled the idea of presence. You are God with us. You are Emmanuel. You have decided to come and make your home in our hearts. Help us as parents to just follow that model, to walk alongside our kids, to be present with them, to put away distractions, anything that might get in the way of connection, and everything from our own selfishness to our own agendas, our own schedules, and things that take precedence over our kids sometimes. Help us just to know what is the right, healthy balance to walk. And God, I just pray for these families that just care enough to dig into this. And God, I pray that you would just help them to walk through with their kids in this, to give them supernatural patience and energy when they need it, and the time to know. God, would your Holy Spirit nudge them to know this is the right time to say something, this is the right time to say nothing. Just give them supernatural guidance through your Spirit to know how to walk through this with their kids. And I just pray for health, so that their children can achieve what you know they are capable of achieving. And may we guide them in their spiritual walk as much or more than their own mental and emotional health, their schoolwork, their current or future goals and dreams and career ideas. And God, when we just walk alongside our kids. Let's hear him pray. Amen. You bet.